So it's a great pleasure that I welcome Professor Otto Santa Ana here today from University of California, Los Angeles. And he's going to talk to us about a model of humour and laughter that he's developing. We met in the US a few weeks ago. He invited me over to talk about some of my work on humour and rhetoric, and we've got some similar ideas on rhetoric that we're discussing. But he's going to give an overview of his theory, and particularly his ideas on politics.
I will be talking about what I call a consilience model, bringing together different kinds of theories. But first I want to thank Drs. Weaver and Lockyer for inviting me here. I really appreciate the time and offer, and especially you guys could be doing things much more fun than this, but I'm happy you're here. Laughter and humor is really fascinating things. It's a part of our daily life. It touches almost every aspect of human nature, and it's ubiquitous, highly structured, and yet we really don't know much about it. There's a lot of thinking about it. It's ephemera that disappears almost immediately, and yet just one instance of humor can affect and change a person's life. We're particularly in this digital world, humor has always been effective, but now we have some amplifying effects that we really need to know about more fully. And for all discussions about humor, most people don't care because they really just want to laugh. The bottom line is we really just enjoy laughing together, and that's the point that I think we need to talk about. We need to think about laughter and humor. There's a lot of questions that have been posed throughout history about humor, what its origin is, why does laughter and humor exist? Is it a fortuitous thing like eye color? It just happens? Or is there some sort of adaptive advantage? The questions that people talk about humor involve psychological aspects and sociological aspects. But the questions that have been posed in the past have been, is humor maligning, or fundamentally is it benign? Can we really talk about the same thing that is both foments hatred and makes people as happy and comfortable as they do? Is there a common thread? Now the political questions are the dark side of humor. One thing that's really amazing and clear is, and Billig's laid it out most recently, is that mocking laughter is a weapon of disciplining, social discipline. Children are particularly vulnerable to that. Add to the fact that now their laughter is commodified and sold on the stock exchange. This is really important to know what the effects of humor are. And now, because of our globalized world, one cartoon, published 10 years ago in Denmark, can result in deaths, half a world away. And then, of course, there's Charlie Hebdo. There's Jon Stewart in the United States is considered to be an intellectual and moral consciousness of the news. On the other hand, comedians in France and Egypt who do basically the same thing have been jailed for their craft. And we even have Donald Trump, the archetype of the ugly American, and he has had one of the largest viewerships in Saturday Night Live last month. There's more technical questions about what actually makes something funny and how a joke actually operates that we can always talk about. Likewise, there's what is the range of jokes that exist? All these questions are a challenge because there's no consilience. It's the classic 7 blind men touching an elephant. They all have different perspectives on it depending on disciplinary perspective. For example, philosophers and humanists simply do not share the same discourse about humor. And for example, Stephen Hallowell, who this is one of the most incredible books on the history of Greek laughter during a 400-year period, the Golden Period. He basically says there's no theory that works for humor. And Mary Beard, who is another historian of the Roman period, has said that neuroscience will not help us understand anything about cultural historians on laughter. And that she even mocks the primatologists who she thinks have anthropomorphized chimpanzee laughter. He simply can't see this. On the other hand, the social scientists like Provine reject out of hand humanist studies of 2,000 years. They say the philosophers and the humanists have never built a model, anything goes, and it's because they're too far away from the subject matter. So there's a lot of problems trying to get consilience between social science and humanists. In the end, we have Chapman and Foote, who wrote a whole book on this, and in their introduction to this book, not the conclusion, introduction, they say there's no embracing humor will ever exist. And yet we have something that we know every child laughs, every normal child laughs, and there's no culture that hasn't expressed laughter and humor. And so where are we? So basically what I've been trying to do all year, and for my readings of the last 6 years on humor, have led me, and I had the opportunity to spend a year sitting and thinking about this and trying to build a consilience model. So I'm lifting from all the different theories that people have that work together and trying to create a single model. My outset is Gervais and Sloan Wilson. Gervais proposed a theory that said that laughter and humor have been expressions of humankind and their antecedents 6 million years back. And that we laughed, welcome please, we laughed together because we bond, social bonding. The more we laugh, the more we bond. And that allowed us to evolve this had evolved as a technique or a tool of social affiliation. Now, the consequence of a theory, and you can see it laid out in this model, what I have here is a timeline of 6 million years. Gervais and Sloan Wilson say that humor began well before humankind existed, more than 5 million years ago, and that humor preceded language by almost 6 million years. So those are two very significant implications that I've tried to build on that. So I take my cue from Gervais and Sloan Wilson and the philosopher John Morrell, as well as the social psychologist Rod Martin, to say that human laughter and humor are originated in the animal social play. So the big question then becomes, what is communicated? And what is the vehicle of that communication? So there's my model. Just so you understand how to read this, this is a timeline. And 6 million years or 7 million years ago is when the evolutionary anthropologists posit the split between the great apes and our antecedents existed. But great apes laugh. Oh, by the way, that's my computer. It's going to tell you what time it is, so we're all on track. Okay? And so what we have here is, I posit cognitive processes, two communication systems. A consequence of the laughter communication system leads to political and social power. And that, in essence, is it. What I'm really pointing out here is look how little time language has existed in this model. So language, which is blown up here a bit, really constitutes a small part of this. And if there's any questions about this model, I mean, this is really where I put everything in there. So I'd be very happy to clarify that before we go on. My model basically says this. Humans, and it's basically from Gervais, humor's structure is not based on language. It's based in rhetoric. And I'm not really going to push that too far. And then I also look at humor's practice requires an additional level of another kind of pragmatics. So you see that I have conversational pragmatics and language in this little slot here. But antecedent to that, and as a prerequisite to conversational pragmatics and language, there was a universal communication pragmatics that covers and is required for laughing together, for conversing together, but also even animal play. And so that's, in essence, the nut of my model. So, again, the origin, in brief, the origin is an animal play. And what happened is the adaptive advantage was that it offered us a social cohesion, a means of articulating social cohesion. The structure of humor, structure in a linguistic or communicative sense, is based in rhetoric, not language. The functions of language are governed by two pragmatic systems, one for playing and joking, and then we have that overlay of language. The psychology of humor is that individuals enjoy laughing together because it makes us, it has in-group bonding. As you know, Humour 101 basically says oxytocin is released in the body of people laughing together. And so I build on other people's work saying that there's an exchange, a social exchange between people who laugh together. And from this exchange, the psychological power of political humor is expressed. And I'm going to end on talking about looking at humor in politics in an epidemiological way. So let's go through this. I'm going to show you a picture of an amoeba, and one's going to eat another. Now, amoebas, of course, have no brain, no nothing like that, and yet they are able here to, one recognizes the other recognizes it's about to be attacked, the other one's trying to get away. This one is rearranging its position and actually opening up its cell membrane to absorb its prey. Now what's taking place are what loosely I can call cognitive processes that, boom, it's eaten. And let's say, what takes place there? What takes place in predation? What takes place for this animal to prey? He had to, let's call him a he, just for the sake of it. He had to, let's do that again. I just love to watch it. So he has to recognize that that's a prey. So there he has recognized objects. Some objects he associates and gives an association with some prey. Others are not prey. So there's object identification, one. Second, there is object, a link of quality or some sort of attribute to that object. Now, from all the things in the world, he has to determine one thing is prey. So there's set formation that's involved. Now, say he had come, the little one had come and was going to try to be the prey on the big one. You have to have some recognition of size or scale. And so scale is considered to be something very primary. And then one of these animals might choose to attack something and realize, oh, this is not prey. So there's negation that's involved. I posit that those five features, those five cognitive processes are involved not only in predation, but human of juxtaposition, set formation, analogy, negation, and scale generate the structure of not just predation, but play. And this is the basis, these five structures are the basis of rhetoric. And so here we have again the five cognitive processes. I use the term cognitive very loosely because I'm talking as far back as amoeba, and they have no nervous system. Predation and play, what happens? Fragmentation, reordering of the world, recognition in the world, regrouping of what is the prey, what isn't the prey, transformation from something which is not to another, inversion and exaggeration. If we just think about play, animals that play, let's think about what takes place when a kitten attacks a piece of string. They've regrouped and transformed something which is not organic, not a prey animal, into a prey. There's inversion when the kitten attacks its mother. Clearly the mother could have certainly killed the kitten, but the mother accepts that, and there's this inversion of the roles. The exaggeration, if you see a kitten attack a piece of string, it jumps much higher than a tomcat would attack. And so these features are involved. Likewise, I argue that the same very elements are involved in humor. So this basic cognitive operations that we use every day, and that can be attributed to creatures as simple as one cell animal. So what I did was my goal was really to look and find a way of characterizing with rhetoric both nonverbal humor and verbal humor. So you saw the Buster Keaton features. I did a joke-by-joke analysis of a piece from the circus. So Charlie, for those of you who don't know Charlie Chaplin, he played the tramp. He was an innocent who'd gone to the city, and he was entirely innocent. And he ended up being taken advantage of, but because he was such a good-hearted person, everything fell out, and he was always the hero. Okay? So Charlie gets attacked by Charlie and a thief scuffle. The thief had stolen money that ends up in Charlie's pocket. And, right? This is a typical story. And Charlie then is chased by the police. Well, Charlie, you'll see Charlie running next to the thief, away from the animal, from the police, I should say. And before he veers away, because Charlie is such a sweet innocent, he doffs his hat. So in full-scale running away from the police, he's still polite. And that we see as ever courteous. He bids adieu, and that's what's funny, or was funny, at the turn of in 1920. Then you're going to see, what I did is I went through each of the laugh points and described the visual joke in terms of juxtaposition, set position, analogy, and so forth. So let me run through it. He still doesn't know if it's him or a mirror. It's that simple, that innocent. So he doffs his hat, and then when he doffs his hat, he goes, oh my God, that's me. Or maybe. Thunk. And he's a little more, he's not going to do it again. So he runs out, and it's a false analogy. A human plays an animatronic image of a human. The thief runs out. Give me my money. No. And it's ironic, the inversion there, because of course Charlie gets the thief gets his comeuppance. Now I've cut this, and it's not quite as smooth as the long story that goes on. So they finally make him a cleanup guy, working sort of the janitorial stuff. So in the end, Charlie falls in love with the daughter of the owner of the circus. And he becomes the star of the circus, and there's a whole lot of things that happen. In the end, he walks away from his love because he sees that she would have a better life if she fell in love with someone else. So that's Charlie's story. So, but what you see in this is that I can break down the elements, or at least I propose that I can break down the elements of humor into rhetorical elements into cognitive operations. Berger and Weaver have used this typology of types of humor techniques which are rhetorical devices. And I did the breakdown and sort of try to demonstrate that all these different kinds of humor rhetorical devices are fundamentally based on 5 features, 5 cognitive processes. So basically, the sum of the cognitive processing of this is that rhetorical contrivances that we use, all of them that we use, structure humor today, and they have their source in only 5 cognitive processes. These were the same that were used in predation for animals even today, and that we use in play. And so I realize you guys don't know what Lincoln logs are, but they're sort of like 5 Lego pieces. And kids get them and they can build anything with them, but they only have 5. So we built log cabins because there were short logs and longer logs and a couple more. There were 5 kinds of pieces, and that's what these cognitive processes are. They can build most of all of our interaction. Okay. Now I'm not going to spend as much time on the function of humor because this is something that interests mostly linguists. But basically what I did is I say that there has to be a motivation of a non-language based pragmatics. And so let's just give you the example. Most linguists, most of the work that you read about humor, that linguists write about, presume that it's based in language. So in this typical exchange, honey, what happened to the roast beef? The dog looked very happy. The dog looks very happy, would be the response by the spouse. On the surface, these are non sequiturs, right? And we, of course, know that they make sense because of the conversational implicatures that are involved. I'm saying that conversation, which is the conversational implicatures that are involved to make sense of this, are in humor, but they are not fundamental to humor. So this is another example. Humor is not about information exchange. Language is all about information exchange. Humor is not. So we're having a dinner party, and my wife goes to the door, and there's a late guest. She's come 45 minutes late, and she starts apologizing, and my wife says, better late than pregnant. Okay, well, what is the purpose? The purpose is not describable of the humor. The humor may be linguistically described in terms of the ambiguity of the word late, but it doesn't capture the point of the joke. The joke is really just to make people happy, to diffuse attention. The social function of humor is the emotion of mirth and merrymaking. So the point of humor is social work, not linguistic work. We use language with linguistic rules to do the linguistic work that we use when we use humor, but that's just beside the point. That's just the mechanism. The function of humor is social. And by the way, for those of you, this is where I think the perlocutionary aspects of humor are, the power of humor. Perlocutionary acts is the social power that's used in language. So I needed something else. And what I went to, it turns out, was Habermas. Habermas has written, the philosopher of social communication. He put together a universal communication pragmatics. It requires sincerity, truth, and appropriateness. And so consider, for example, a dog. He wants to play with another playmate. The dog, typically, you've seen it, a dog will go down at its forepaws, and its tail will wag slowly, and that's an invitation to play. Now, the potential playmate will look at that dog and say, is he sincere? Does he really want to play with me, or does he want to rip my throat out? And if it's a sincere gesture, then he asks, is it in our real world, an external world, is this the right time to play? Are we playing in the middle of the street? and could get killed. No, this is the wrong time. Or it's a nice little park, let's play. And it's appropriate. Can I play with this dog? Or is it a dog of a different status and I shouldn't play with him? Okay? So this takes place according to Habermas. Habermas wasn't interested in animal play or humor, but I've been able to use this framework and characterize what is the universal pragmatics of humor that captures all the features of social play, laughing together, and it is the prerequisite to conversational pragmatics. And so this is why I have this framework. Animals and universal pragmatics governs the social actions, the functions of the setting of playing together. You can't play with somebody who doesn't want to play with you. And we know that. And so the rules are the Habermas's rules. Laughing together is the same sort of thing. It's expressed in terms of rhetoric. And so is conversing together. But what happens is that once language arises, rhetoric is subsumed in it, and so it's hard to see it. It only was like looking at non-verbal humor, like the Charlie Chaplin piece, that I had the angle that I needed to get there. So the pragmatics of playing together, laughing together, and conversing together are ratified by the same universal pragmatics. And that universal pragmatics is different from and prerequisite to conversational pragmatics. All right, let's go to sociology, the psychology. Let's have a thought experiment, please. I don't know about you, but I grew up a boy. And when boys got together in adolescence, they'd be joking around, especially if you knew each other very, very well. Everyone would start teasing each other. It'd be sort of a round robin. Everyone got teased. But fundamentally, at one point in time, they start capping on. I don't know what you guys call it, but I used to call it capping on. So Georgie gets capped on. I mean, it's his nose, or it's his shoes, or it's the fact that he has a girlfriend, or the fact that he doesn't have a girlfriend. It doesn't matter. They start capping. Everyone says the same joke over and over and over. Dozens of jokes. People are laughing. The boys are laughing. They laugh until they can't talk. Their breathing is stopped, and they laugh. If they can't join in with another joke, it's typically the same joke over and over and over. It rises to a crescendo. We all know this experience. What always happens psychologically, and what never happens psychologically? What I propose is that what always happens is each young person in that circle is psychologically affected by the laugh attack. And what never occurs is someone in that circle never is emotionally or socially touched by it, unless they have autism. So I want to say that laughter is the direct source of the social power of humor. The more we laugh, the more social expression and effect it takes place. Now, this works very well with what I call I've drawn from a lot of different people, that an affect of the laugher has effect on the other people. So there's an affect motivation exchange. And I propose this on the basis of William James' theories of emotion, that emotions govern our cognition. So this is, very, very old stuff, over 100 years old. Even today, cognitive neuroscientists endorse basically the same point of view. That we do not think and do something, we feel and then we think something. And that's framed up with the Aristotelian triangle, as Simon calls it, or I call it the ABC triangle of joking. ABC means the audience, the butt, and the comedian. Okay? And so if we presume equal distance among the audience, the comedian, and the butt, that's where everything starts. Now, what happens when there's a great and successful joke? People laugh. And what happens there is that there is an in-grouping of the comedian and the audience. They become more bonded. If they're laughing at someone, they derogate, they push away psychologically the butt of the joke. So insofar as the comedian successfully makes the audience laugh, And he puts greater social distance between themselves and the butt of the joke. And this I call the laughing together frame, the pragmatics of laughing together. 5 perlocutionary effects or 5 social effects take place via laughter. Amusement? Well, yeah, but in-group formation and in-group tension release, especially if they're academics. Fourth, there's out-group derogation. So here the butt is pushed away. And that out-group, if he's part of that circle, has greater social tension in that circle of people. It's one metric. I'm arguing it's one metric. The more you laugh, the more power is induced. Now, neurologists have talked now about a cognitive, an affective, and a cognitive, or motivational aspects of psychology. And cognition is, of course, thinking, the cognition, the little gears running in our brains. Affect is our emotional response. And motivation is our influencing other people. Now, this is not me coming out of blowing air. This comes out of cognitive neural science, developmental science, and there's 13 people in this article, so all of them can't be. They're all deluding themselves or that. So cognition, affect, and motivation. Now there's a caveat. This is how we experience it in our world, but cognitively, actually, the blood vessels and the neuron circuits that are firing, there's no correspondence there. So our experience is different phenomenologically from the biological experience. But I use this little triangle, and I use these triads to illustrate what I'll talk about in a bit. Let's consider another setting. There's a young mother. She's trying to get groceries done. And the baby's going crazy. He's acting up. And what does she do? She can either yell at the kid, "Stop it!" or she can just simply churn and silently glower. Is that how you say glower? At the child. And what happens? The kid shuts up. So either non-verbally or verbally, something happens. What this I call is the affect control theory. And it's not it's McKinnon's theory that when you know you're being evaluated by other people, your actions are monitored by others, and you know you're being monitored, you respond to them. And in a situated communication, the intensity of the mother's reaction is correspondingly expressed by the child, and the motivation is increased. So if the kid is acting up and she says, "Quit it, honey, nothing's going to happen." If she turns and screams at him, there's more likelihood. So that's just the affect. And in philosophy, affect theory has been developed as well. Douglas Robinson says that this is reciprocal consent. Notice now we're talking about a dyad in a consent format. You should recognize this looks parallel to something that we've talked about earlier. So the mother's physical body expression of anger, namely her emotional effect, is expressed to the child. Her son feels that meaning, and it's expressed in his body incarnation. The motivational force is generated in the child. So, reciprocal consent, which is Robinson's theory, a philosopher. Situated events is the social psychologist. And it's compatible with Habermas, which we just talked about in terms of mutual ratification. Bourdieu himself would have done the same thing, talking about institutions, but that's basically what we're doing. So I talk about the affect motivation exchange. Think about a kid playing in a game. So the little girl is playing and she sees her best friend of all her life. She's 4 years old, right? And that's a lot of life, right? So 99% of her life she loves her friend, and she sees that smile, and so she herself feels that glow. That's a conation. being expressed from the affect of her playmate. Or the same thing takes place when a comedian makes a joke, either with a face, silently, or by telling a joke. The audience will feel that bodily, energetic impulse, motivation. So this is the speaker effect, becomes causation and leads to other things. The mother's scowl generates motivational force in the child, and he stops acting up. A playmate's face generates another kind of motivational effect, and the other feels happiness. Comic smirk or comic joke motivates an audience effect of mirth. We've already associated the consequence of the laughter, but the expression is there. So this is what I think is a psychosocial source of power. Now, part 4, the political power of humor. Now, laughter, I argue, has a social power of humor, but some humor scholars that you know and have been critiqued in this, among you here in this circle, are people who dismiss the social power of political humor. And so most recently, 2008, in Humour, a whole set of contemporary, productive scholars looked at the Muhammad cartoon. And and the people I'm going to list cited that, hey, it does have no impact. So Elliot Oring, in his book Engaging Humor, said, nothing in humor theory really illuminates anything more than any common sense would be. That's very unhelpful. Victor Raskin, longtime editor of Humour, he entitled his piece "The Political Impotence of Humor," and he argued that he consistently says there's no effectiveness of humor, of political humor on social life. Christy Davies said, if there's anything, it's trivial. And Paul Lewis, one would wonder whether these little small-scale effects can have global and national impact. So he's doubting his tool set. Well, I disagree. If you have an issue, we want to develop a model, we have to build the tools to work that model. And so George Bush was a target of Letterman's jokes. The top 10 Bush moments.
Number 8. The issue of immigration stirs intense emotion. And in recent weeks, Americans have seen those emotions on display. On the streets of major cities, Number 7. Number 6. That there be a stable Iran that is capable of rejecting Iranian influence. Iraq. Number 5. I like to fish. Number 4. Number 3. Number 2. Doing a better job of talking to each other. The left hand now knows what the right hand is doing. And the number 1 favorite George W. Bush moment.
That's our president, shooting a loogie. All right, so what I want to say is that if you're going to look at political humor, you can't look at just one joke. This was actually just one joke repeated 10 times, repeated 120 and 117 times. So Letterman had the top 10 Bush moments, and so we are talking about 1,200 jokes that millions of people watched. Letterman had about 3.5 million people every day watching. So what's involved? What's involved is repetition, the type of joke, the performance, the comedic performance. I mean, if George Bush wasn't that so funny, it would never be funny, right? And audience design. And so I'm really excited because Simon's working in critical humor studies are looking at this, specifying these rhetorical devices and looking at types of humor, and particularly looking at the sources and purpose of this corporate political humor. Now, other scholars who are in political science have used humor to look at political persuasion. I don't think Baumgartner has been particularly effective, but he has a great tool set as a political scientist to look at political persuasion. He just needs a tool, the right tools in humor. And so here's a preliminary list of factors that might be involved in the George Bush joke. You got to identify with the comedian. The more you identify with the comedian, the more you're going to like the joke. The audience. So if two people are laughing together, that's a very different synergy than if 10 people are laughing together, say a group of families. Or if we're in a comedy club of 50 or 500, that's an entirely different setting. That volume of people, that group of people really makes for a different synergy. Then we go to, a big arena or television. Each of these have different synergies, different effects on the effect of the jokes. And so let's consider, for example, a one-off joke. There's a special, and some comedian does his shtick for an hour. It's great for the comedian, but the effect socially is not going to be as big as Letterman's effect, since he has the floor and he has the audience time after time. Then just the sheer number of jokes. So this looks like you should do this mathematically. And so I actually tried playing this game up. I got some economists to work with me. I played them lots of jokes, so they got paid by listening to the jokes. And we tried to come up with a little model using exactly those factors. It's a start, but it really isn't appropriate, because what they're actually measuring is dots on a scattergram. And each of us, when we laugh, are not dots on a scattergram. So we go to something called agent-based modeling, which is basically computer simulation. And it's an effort to model those dots on the scattergram as interacting agents. Let's just imagine the flu is coming through. And those of you who have children, those of you who have elderly parents, you get freaked out much more than the college student if the flu is coming by. You know very well that there's an effect. So your response as an individual agent changes. Okay? So the full social setting that we're involved in. This is what we need to do to begin to do political humor. You need to begin with assumptions about those agents and interactions. You generate hundreds and hundreds of simulations with the computer, and you see the large-scale patterns. The agents are going to represent comedians, audiences, or butts of joke, but they also can represent niches, party affiliations, communities, and nations. And honestly, it just comes from the work that's been done in agent-based modeling is done epidemiologically. So here's the thing about influenza. It's a vector that's carried airborne or body-body contact. There's a level of vulnerability. Adults are less likely to die. You get sick, you get relatively sick or more sick. The virulence of the virus depends on the likelihood of infection per contact. The exposure, well, if you're in a, I don't remember going in a plane, someone has the flu, well, that just gives everybody the flu because you're just have a very tight room. So then, and there's the numbers of people sneezing and healthy people in the room. Type of exposure, those of you who have children, you know that all of them get the flu because they're basically licking each other's faces in daycare. But we still can get sick with a sticky handshake. I hate that, don't you? But then even we could get sick with one little virus popping into our nose out in the open air if we're just so unlucky. So I did a parallel between influenza, which is done epidemiologically, and anti-George Bush jokes. Of course, it's a little too small for you to see, so I just blow it up. So instead of the vector, we have the same issues. The vector is the comedian telling the jokes. The better jokes are told, the more likely it's going to work. The vulnerability, what does that mean? That means the political, if you're telling jokes about George Bush, people who are Bush supporters are not going to be happy. Those who are Democrats or anti-Bush people are going to be happy. So there's a difference in the vulnerability. The exposure has again to do with the audience, the kind and size of audience, and the type of exposure, as well as just the raw number of jokes. Now, over the summer, with luck, I'm going to try to build this model out, because when I talked to the epidemiologist who was doing malaria studies, and I worked through this whole presentation, he got it. He said, oh, this is easy to do. I mean, I just have to change some of the models. We do have information, for example, how many jokes Bush is a dummy, Bush is adult jokes that were broadcast nationally. We know who the audiences were, and we can factor out the facts of his participation in Katrina's debacle, or the Iranian, the Iraqi, there I'm doing a George Bushy, the Iraqi invasion and the Afghani invasion. All of that stuff can be factored out. So we could actually see the effect of jokes in this sort of setting. So I propose that we should be more serious about thinking about humor and not disregard the obvious social impact of political humor. And that's what I want to try to do. So thank you. He was trying to get he went to get a grant for a silly walk, and he didn't do a very good job. So the program officer is showing him how it's done. Yeah, he's applying for funding.